Hello, I'm going to read from my book Intercession. I've written 3 books in the series. This is the first one, and the subtitle is Becoming the Person God Listens to, the Journey from Judgment to Mercy. I'll read the introduction. I've got a quote from Oswald Chambers. Most of us would prefer, however, to spend our time doing something that will get immediate results. We don't want to wait on God to resolve matters in his good time, because his ideas of a good time is seldom in sync with ours. The introduction. Habakkuk 3 verse 2. O Lord, I have heard thy speech and was afraid. O Lord, revive thy work in the midst of the years. In the midst of the years make known. In wrath remember mercy. I have just finished a series of books on the subject of 6,000 years of Babylon and shown that God's people always end up being seduced into this system. This religious system is the counterfeit to the true Church of God, and history has shown that, even after a few years after God has revived his people back to true worship, the rot sets in, and politics, finance and ritual take the place of simplicity and humility. When the people of God backslide from the narrow way and enter the broad way that is Babylon, it will always bring the judgment of God upon them. The Bible and church history are testimonies to this cycle of restoration, backsliding and judgment. God cannot be just and merciful at the same time, because the act of mercy is to put aside the act of judgment. Mercy is a decision not to judge what should be judged, and in that sense it is a negative and unjust act. What we need to know is the key that turns God's heart to set aside judgment and show mercy. Always intercession. It is very simple, for the answer is and always will be intercession. Intercession is mediation or advocacy. And unless somebody stands in the gap between the judgment of God and those he is to punish, the judgment will surely be administered. There is no other way to escape the judgment of God. Evangelism, teaching and prayer are all ineffectual once God has decided that judgment is the only option. But how do we intercede? And what is intercession anyway? Is it a type of prayer? Is it something we do by faith? Or is it to do with our work, such as fasting or self-denial? I've heard many sermons on intercession and many opinions from Christians of all denominational flavours. And my considered opinion is that it is a very misunderstood subject. And therefore, the church has not only been ineffectual in turning the tide of this godless society from the apostasy we found ourselves a part of back to God and righteousness. Always resisted. If intercession is the only antidote for turning God's judgment away, then it will be the most resisted by the powers of darkness. One of Satan's great weapons used so effectively against the body of Christ is ignorance. Of course, I do not have all the answers or perfect revelation, but I've been studying this subject for 36 years now and feel that it's the right time to put the fruit of my revelation into a book. In 1978, a small group of believers who attended my father's church in Manchester, UK, were called of God to intercession. We knew little of what God was asking of us, and were naive on so many issues surrounding the subject. It was a painful road, and I'm still travelling it after all these years. I have found out that it is a far greater than a type of prayer, a very costly ministry, and certainly not for the faint-hearted. I'll share some of the adventures and mistaken ideas we all had later in the book. A few years after this call of God and many experiences later, Barratt Ministries published 2 tracts on the subject. One was entitled, What is Intercession? The second one, The Need for Intercession. We printed them and sent them to every ministry in the country. I obtained handbooks from all the denominations that I could find and systematically sent one to each of the ministers. I do not know what effect it had on the spiritual climate of the country, but the knowledge we received was very limited. In other words, ministers did not take the warning and call to intercession seriously enough to do something about it. I did, of course, receive a few invitations to speak on the subject, and one minister who asked me to speak at his church has become one of my best friends. There was fruit. I think on hindsight the best thing to come of this exercise was that a Christian radio station, UCB, were handed a tract by one of their workers, and I was invited to do a few 20-minute talks on the subject. I made notes and ended up doing 14 talks on the station live, and these were repeated a few years later. I asked for a copy of the tapes and from them produced 17 one-hour talks on intercession. We filmed some of them and also made them available as audio sermons on CD plus MP3 files when the technology came into being. This series will be based on those studies, plus the experiences and fresh revelation I've received over the years since I first published them. Before I finish this introduction, I should mention a fact that many overlook when talking about this subject, and in doing so have relegated intercession to a type of prayer. There is a legal aspect to all this because God is the judge of all things, and if a person or people of God are under his judgment, then a legal approach has to be adopted. In other words, an advocate is needed on the behalf of the accused, someone to persuade the judge that judgment and punishment should be changed to mercy. This will only be accepted if the judge sees good legal reasons to do so, because there is always the prosecuting solicitor, in this case the accuser of the brethren, to tell the judge that he must be just and pass sentence and not allow for any mercy. We have a legal battle every time there is intercession, and I will cover all this legal aspect in more detail later in this series of books.